Hello again, Professor Sackett-Taylor here. This is a video lecture I'm making for ECON 321 Natural Resource Economics based on the content from Environmental and Natural Resource Economics, A Contemporary Approach by Harris and Roach. This video focuses on Chapter 4, Public Goods and Common Property Resources. Let's start talking about common property resources. And for the purposes of this video, we're going to use an ocean fishery as an example. So all of the goods that we produce, consume, and exchange can be categorized as either rival or non-rival. A rival good is a good where the use of that good by one person diminishes either the quantity available or the quality available of use of that good to others. So something that's rival means when I use it, there's less available for you, or there's less available of the good stuff for you, maybe. Therefore, if something is non-rival, it means that anyone can use any amount of it and it doesn't diminish the availability of that good or service for other people. Similarly, all goods can be categorized as either excludable or non-excludable. A good that is excludable is going to be a good where there are limits or restrictions in place to who has access to that good. In other words, you can exclude people from using it. So therefore, a non-excludable good is available to everyone. Therefore, it's usually a good where there are conditions present that make it impossible or at least very difficult to exclude any potential users. So based on this kind of categorization, we essentially can put all goods and services into one of four overall categories. The goods that you are most familiar with that are often the things that we're thinking about when we are sitting in economics classes talking about supply and demand are private goods. Private goods are rival and excludable. They're goods that you buy and sell in a excludable marketplace. So it's rival in the sense that when I buy one, there's therefore one less for you to buy. And it's excludable because I actually have to use some kind of monetary value in exchange for receiving that good. These are goods we think of the most often. Other excludable goods include things like club goods, which are non-rival. You could think about like when you buy a ticket to a concert, right? So it's excludable in the sense that that concert is excludable in the sense that people had to buy tickets in order to get in. But once you're in and you're at that concert, me listening to the concert does not impede your ability to listen to the concert. It gets a little into a gray area when you talk about congestion or like too many people being in one place at one time, but that's the best example that we're going to use for right now of a club good. Because really what we want to focus on here in this video lecture are the two other kinds of goods, both of which are non-excludable. That's common property resources and public goods. Let's talk about common property resources. A common property resource is available to everyone, so it's non-excludable. But use of the resource may diminish either the quantity of it available or the quality of it available to others, so it's therefore a rival good. You could think about fisheries or forests or things that, like grassland, something that like everyone has access to, but it gets overused. So an open access resource is a resource that has unrestricted or unregulated access, such as an ocean fishery. Let's look at this example to provide context to our discussion of common property resources.
Fish are delicious. I mean, I really like fish. There are at least a dozen recipes for fish, and hunting them is an important part of human culture all over the world. Fish are also dumb. I mean, they seem to be easy to catch. Oh, what's this? A fresh and convenient meal dangling in front of my uh-oh. Hey guys, let's swim in a group. It'll confuse predators and each of us will have a less likely chance of uh-oh. I've been reading about them and they're actually not as dumb as they seem. If they happen to survive capture, they learn from it and are better at avoiding capture in the future. Some build and remember dominance hierarchies. Others know how to smash clams against rocks to get the insides. You know, they just seem to be as intelligent as any other animal. Shouldn't really come as a surprise. I don't know, maybe we just don't notice because they're under a bunch of water, and they always have a stupid expression. A good chunk of the vegetarians I've met eat fish. That's how little respect they get. Anyways, none of that matters. The point was, fishing has gotten too easy. Not that being a fisher is easy, mind you. It's just that now people can take fish out of the water faster than the fish can reproduce, which can hurt the population. Less fish means less fish reproducing and their productivity can decline, which ultimately means less profits for fishermen the next time. And this is the problem we're here to look at in this series. How to make sure a population of fish is used sustainably so you can use it forever. One of the most important problems for the long-term use of a fishery is the problem with open access conditions on a common pool resource. A common pool resource is a resource like fish or trees. It's rivalrous, meaning if one person takes some fish, it prevents someone else from taking that same bunch of fish. So luckily, fish is renewable. You can take some and the fish will reproduce. Take too much though, and their productivity might go down, since there's less fish laying eggs and reproducing. If there's only one person fishing a particular stock of fish, they're probably not going to take so much that they're hurting the stock for the next season or for 5 seasons from now. If they do, they're only hurting their own access to the fish in the future. Better to put in less effort now and always ensure there's something for later. But the other trait that makes it a common pool resource is that it's difficult or costly to stop other people from using it, right? Especially in the ocean, it's pretty hard to draw a territory around a certain body of water and then police and enforce it too, at least compared to land. So multiple people using the resource is pretty much always the case for fisheries. If one person in the group notices they're all fishing too much, that person could try to take less to preserve the stock for the future, but if they do, someone else will probably just take more, or other fishermen will enter the fishery to take that extra share. An individual working alone has an incentive to fish less now to preserve fishing for later, but an individual in a group can't do that because someone else can just use what he's leaving. This is the problem with open access. They call it the tragedy of the commons. It's incorrectly named because it's not necessarily a problem with common pool resources. A group of people can work together and behave like an individual, solving the problem. The problem is when it's treated as open access. Open access meaning there are no rules, or nobody is following the rules. So people are just racing to take as much as they can. Working as hard as they can trying to get as much fish for themselves, they're actually hurting themselves compared to if they were working as a team. This is why they call it a tragedy. Each fisher is only thinking about themselves, hurting the fishery as a whole, but ironically, they're hurting themselves too. This has been a bigger problem over the last 100 years or so as the demand for fish exploded from the population boom. Meeting the new demand is new technology that makes fishing cheaper. There's GPS navigation to plot out and find fishing spots easily, and sonar to target the specific places where they are in the water. They have these deep sea factory ships, which are called factory ships because they put the factory on the ship. Instead of trying to keep the fish fresh and bring them onto shore for processing, they process them right away and then freeze them, all while still on the ship. It allows them to go out farther and stay out for weeks. These kinds of boats can exacerbate the open access issue. Fishermen fishing close to where they live, the inshore or artisanal fishermen if you like, can see the benefits of working together and might form a little fishing government relatively easily. They know if they don't, they will be in a bad way in the future, hurting themselves and their children and their neighbors. But fishers with large factory ships, the offshore or large-scale commercial fishers, their ships can travel farther and deal with bad weather easier, so if they deplete a stock, they can move on to another without being affected as much. In this series, we're going to look at management strategies to preserve fishing long term. In the next video, we're going to look closer at the problem with open access and find out what is the optimal amount of fishing effort for long-term profits. Fish are delicious.
So here's the idea. We know that the profit maximizing level of effort, considering the entire fishery, is a certain amount. But if there's no regulation by the government on how that fishery is managed, i.e. that fishery is open access, then what level of fishing will actually occur? Well, every fisher is going to be assumed to be only concerned about their own profits. And therefore, the individual fisher people are not going to consider how their activity affects the fishery as a whole, or whether the fishery is profitable to the whole group. So this is a situation where we're experiencing a shift in the returns to scale that we get from our inputs. Let me remind you what that means. So constant returns to scale means that when we put in, say, one more input, another boat, it results in a proportional increase in output. So more boats, like a proportional amount of more fish. Diminishing returns is a situation where when you add another input, you get a smaller than proportional increase in output, right? So add more boats, get a little bit more fish. Absolute diminishing returns is a situation where when you increase inputs, you actually get a decrease in output. So add more boats, harvest less fish. Overfishing is a level of fishing where it depletes the stock of fish over time because you're taking too many and you're taking more than what can be replenished naturally by their reproductive cycle. So in general, when we look at a fishery, initially, as you add the number of boats to a fishery, you should experience constant returns up until a point. Eventually, you will reach a number of fisher people or a number of boats in which you start to experience diminishing returns. That is, more boats, still a little bit more fish, but not as much as before. It's the point at which you shift into absolutely diminishing returns, where you are adding boats and harvesting less fish, where that's the problem. You then know that you are over harvesting, you're overfishing, you're depleting the stock faster than it can replenish itself. So the previous video named this as the tragedy of the commons. It's really the tragedy of open access to the commons. It's the tendency for common property resources to be overexploited and extracted from because no one has the incentive to conserve the resource as long as there are individual and financial incentives to expand your own exploitation, right? It's the idea that, like, if I don't take some now, someone else will. Let's watch this short video.
Imagine as a thought experiment that you live in a small village and depend on the local fish pond for food. You share the pond with 3 other villagers. The pond starts off with a dozen fish, and the fish reproduce. For every 2 fish, there will be 1 baby added each night. So, in order to maximize your supply of food, how many fish should you catch each day? Take a moment to think about it. Assume baby fish grow to full size immediately, and that the pond begins at full capacity, and ignore factors like the sex of the fish you catch. The answer? 1. And it's not just you. The best way to maximize every villager's food supply is for each fisherman to take just 1 fish each day. Here's how the math works. If each villager takes 1 fish, there will be 8 fish left overnight. Each pair of fish produces 1 baby, and the next day the pond will be fully restocked with 12 fish. If anyone takes more than 1, the number of reproductive pairs drops, and the population won't be able to bounce back. Eventually, the fish in the lake will be gone, leaving all 4 villagers to starve. This fish pond is just one example of a classic problem called the tragedy of the commons. The phenomenon was first described in a pamphlet by economist William Forster Lloyd in 1833 in a discussion of the overgrazing of cattle on village common areas. More than 100 years later, ecologist Garrett Hardin revived the concept to describe what happens when many individuals all share a limited resource, like grazing land, fishing areas, living space, even clean air. Hardin argued that these situations pit short-term self-interest against the common good. and they end badly for everyone, resulting in overgrazing, overfishing, overpopulation, pollution, and other social and environmental problems. The key feature of a tragedy of the commons is that it provides an opportunity for an individual to benefit him or herself while spreading out any negative effects across the larger population. To see what that means, let's revisit our fish pond. Each individual fisherman is motivated to take as many fish as he can for himself. Meanwhile, any decline in fish reproduction is shared by the entire village. Anxious to avoid losing out to his neighbors, a fisherman will conclude that it's in his best interest to take an extra fish, or 2, or 3. Unfortunately, this is the same conclusion reached by the other fishermen, and that's the tragedy. Optimizing for the self in the short term isn't optimal for anyone in the long term. That's a simplified example, but the tragedy of the commons plays out in the more complex systems of real life too. The overuse of antibiotics has led to short-term gains in livestock production and in treating common illnesses. But it's also resulted in the evolution of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which threaten the entire population. A coal-fired power plant produces cheap electricity for its customers and profits for its owners. These local benefits are helpful in the short term. But pollution from mining and burning coal is spread across the entire atmosphere and sticks around for thousands of years. There are other examples too. Littering, water shortages, deforestation, traffic jams, even the purchase of bottled water. But human civilization has proven it's capable of doing something remarkable. We form social contracts, we make communal agreements, we elect governments, and we pass laws. All this to save our collective selves from our own individual impulses. It isn't easy, and we certainly don't get it right nearly all of the time. But humans, at our best, have shown that we can solve these problems, and we can continue to do so if we remember Hardin's lesson. When the tragedy of the commons applies, what's good for all of us is good for each of us. TED-Ed is a nonprofit. If you value our work, please consider supporting it on patreon.com/TEDEd.
So similar to the end of that video, there are solutions for this, but it does require collective management. Dr. Elinor Ostrom was the first female economist to win the Nobel Prize. Her work focused on different communities and cultures that successfully managed open access common pool resources. Her findings resulted in the 5 following basically framework or rules for how to successfully manage commons. It requires that most users of a resource be involved in devising the rules for managing the resource itself. There should be monitors of the resource, accountable to the resource users who periodically evaluate the conditions present. There should be mechanisms to resolve any conflict that are responsive and low cost. The rules for managing the resource should be adapted to the local conditions and the needs of the community using it. And there should be graduated sanctions, meaning tougher and tougher rules or tougher and tougher fines for resource users who violate the rules. Besides this, what have we done in terms of market policies, market-based interventions to prevent overfishing? There are season or gear restrictions. So shortening the amount of time that boats can actually be out on the water, or limiting the type of technology that they're allowed to use. We use fishing licenses. So you have to buy in to be able to be given the right to fish in a certain area. Individual transferable quotas means that each person who has a license has a quota or a cap on the number of fish that they can take. They can then buy and sell these quotas to other people depending on the number that they actually want. So someone who wants more fish could buy quotas from others, and someone who wants fewer fish could sell their quotas to others. This essentially creates a market where one didn't exist before. And finally, we can, as a government, step in to create marine protected areas. This applies outside of oceans as well, right? This is public lands, national parks, conservation areas, where we say hunting or fishing is not allowed here. That's common pool resources. And I think that this video has gotten long enough to sustain your attention for now. So let's take a break on this chapter. And when we come back in the next video, we'll talk about public goods.